Hi friends, what's up? It's Jaime here. Welcome back to another Fangirl Fridays video. For today's Fangirl Fridays video, I wanted to talk about some of the books that I've read recently. As you guys probably know, I'm a pretty avid reader. I've read about 30 books this year so far, and I've made lots of videos where I talk about the books that I've read or the books that I've gotten. But for today's video, I wanted to do something a little bit different than book videos that I've done before. So I've done book reviews on the channel before, but usually when I do those videos, I'm just talking about one book. Those videos tend to be two-part videos because I have a tendency to ramble a lot in case you don't know. But those videos are still, even if they're two-parters, I'm still just talking about one book. So for today's video, I thought that it might be fun to do something a little different and review several books in one video. I read 5 books in July, and those are the books that I'm going to be talking about for this video. I'm gonna do my very best to keep these reviews as succinct and short as possible, but again, hello. I have a tendency to ramble, so we'll see how that goes. So without further ado, let's get into the video. Starting with If You Could Be Mine by Sarah Farazan. If You Could Be Mine is Sarah Farazan's debut YA novel that came out in 2013. We follow the story of Sahar, an Iranian teenage girl who wants to marry her best friend, Nasrin. However, same-sex marriage is illegal in Iran, and open displays of queerness can result in imprisonment and even death, not to mention the general public scrutiny. Nasrin is Sahar's first love. They've been in love since they were children, so when Nasrin's parents announced that she has been arranged to marry an older man, we follow Sahar as she contemplates undergoing gender reassignment surgery. Because while same-sex marriage is illegal in Iran, gender reassignment surgery isn't. It's actually paid for by the government. And so this way Sahar and Nasrin can be together. They won't have to hide their relationship or face legal repercussions or face public scrutiny, or so Sahar believes. And that's basically the setup for the story. I really enjoyed If You Could Be Mine. I mean, it was heartbreaking to read, but it was definitely one of my favorite books that I've read so far this year. This is my first book that I've read by an Iranian American author that's also set in Iran, that also explores what the queer and trans communities look like in Iran, or at least how they were in the 2010s. I don't know how much things have changed or stayed the same since the book was written. I'm always really interested in learning more about the queer and trans communities outside of the US because I think it's really important to be educated on the LGBTQIA+ community outside of like a Western context or through a non-Western lens. Because I've seen a lot of Western people who have this idea that queer and trans people either don't exist in countries that have very anti-LGBTQIA+ policies and views, or they're like, when queer and trans people are discussing issues within those countries regarding the queer and trans communities, people are like, oh, well, why do you live there then? Like, why don't you just leave? If you don't, like, if you know that they're so, like, if they're so queerphobic or they're so transphobic and, like, their policies and their views, why don't you just go somewhere else? Why don't you just live somewhere else? Which is a really icky and privileged take because as you see when you read If You Could Be Mine, Sahar is just a teenager. She didn't choose to be gay in Iran, but she is, and her and Nasrin can't just up and leave. They can't just run away. Like, where the fuck are they supposed to go? They are just kids. Where are they gonna get the money to, like, support and, like, sustain themselves? Like, it's just, like, it's not as simple as just, like, oh, well, just don't live, like, in a very, again, like, a country like Iran that has very, like, strict anti-LGBTQIA+ policies. Literally all Sahar wants is to be able to love her girlfriend without fear of retribution from society, and you really feel for her as you go through this book because throughout the entire book, like, everything that Sahar does is to be with Nasrin because she loves her so much. If You Could Be Mine depicts the realities of queer people in Iran like Sahar, as well as the trans community, which Sahar becomes more familiar with as she is, like, really contemplating undergoing gender reassignment surgery. And oftentimes, those realities are not fun. Now, while If You Could Be Mine is definitely heartbreaking and sad in a lot of ways, like, I'm not gonna deny that, it isn't all depressing, and without spoiling the ending, I think that it was actually a pretty good ending for what Sahar needed. It's not exactly a happily ever after. It's an ending rooted in reality. There are no miracles that happen. Homophobia doesn't magically go poof in Iran, but Sahar is able to reconcile with that in her own way, so take that for what you will. I give If You Could Be Mine a solid 4 stars. I really enjoyed this book, but again, as a warning, it tackles a lot of homophobia and transphobia, and it's quite emotional. It's definitely not gonna be a feel-good, lighthearted read if that's what you're in the market for, but if you're in a headspace where you feel that you can handle those subjects, I would definitely recommend this book. Next up, we have Homebodies by Tembe Denton Hurst. Homebodies is Tembe Denton Hurst's debut novel that came out in May of this year. It was also Safflet's June fiction book. In case you don't know, Safflet is the Sapphic book club that I'm a part of. Homebodies follows the story of Mickey Hayward, a black lesbian writer who learns that she is being let go from her media job in New York City. In response to being let go, Mickey publishes a searing manifesto on Twitter in which she details the racism and the sexism that she had dealt with in the industry and at her job, only for her letter to be met with radio silence. We follow Mickey as she sinks further into self-doubt over her abilities as a writer and as she contemplates her future in media as well as the future of her long-term relationship with her girlfriend. Due to being fired and seeing possibly irrevocable cracks in her relationship begin to show, Mickey returns to her hometown in Maryland, in which she is tempted by the simplicity of her former life before she had moved to New York City, which may include possibly reconnecting with her first love. However, just as Mickey begins to settle back into Maryland, her manifesto gets caught up in a media scandal, and suddenly daytime television shows, magazines, and the internet all want to hear what Mickey has to say about being a black woman in media. I absolutely loved Homebodies. It was everything that I hoped for and more. I really loved Mickey as a protagonist. I loved how we got to see her journey of like trying to figure out who she was outside of her corporate identity, and also just like trying to figure out what the next step in life for her was, because for a while that media job was kind of like her everything, and now it's like without it she was like, well, what do I do now? I also really loved how Homebodies really explores this theme of like what happens when you choose people and things that aren't choosing you in return, that aren't putting as much care and effort into you as you are into them. And it explores this theme in multiple ways, like with Mickey's job. Like, she worked herself to the bone. She put her everything, her blood, sweat, and tears into that job, and she still got fired. And also with T, Mickey's childhood best friend and first love, who has had a long history of stringing her along and making her feel insecure. And it's just so lovely and affirming to see just how so much of Mickey's journey is about rest and reflection and re-examining her relationships, new and old, to see what is serving her and what isn't. So yeah, I literally recommend Homebodies to everyone. It is easily a 5-star read. I absolutely loved it. It has everything you could want: romance, heartbreak, saying fuck you to corporations for being racist and sexist. It's also very, very gay. Like, what more could you want from a book? Next up, we have How Far the Light Reaches by Sabrina Imbler. How Far the Light Reaches is Sabrina Imbler's debut collection of essays that came out last year. It was also our June nonfiction book for Safflet. This essay collection / memoir contains 10 essays in which queer mixed-race science journalist Sabrina Imbler draws upon their knowledge of marine biology to chronicle their feelings and experiences in regards to their queer, trans, and mixed-race identities. Each chapter focuses on usually one specific sea creature, and then Sabrina draws connections between that sea creature and how it relates to either queerness or transness or mixed-race identity or a variety of other topics that are covered in this book. I really enjoyed this book. I got to learn about a bunch of sea creatures that I had never heard of before, which was pretty cool. What I really loved was how each sea creature was then used as like a catalyst for conversations about family and race and sexuality and gender. Like how Sabrina was able to draw parallels between the starving octopus and their relationship with their mother, or how they used the butterfly fish and other hybrid sea creatures to facilitate a conversation about mixed race people. I also loved how Sabrina used necropsy reports to essentially analyze their past queer relationships and like determine the cause of like why those relationships broke down. I thought that it was a really clever way to like examine those relationships as if they were a creature that had died. Each of Sabrina's essays were super captivating. They were very educational while also being emotional and reflective, and I loved all of them. My personal favorite, though, I will say, was the one about hybrids, as someone who comes from a mixed family. Though I quickly want to call out the essay Beware the Sand Striker to provide a sexual assault trigger warning. The whole chapter talks about sexual assault in a pretty graphic way as it pertains to Sabrina's experiences as well as those of Lorena Bobbitt. So just a heads up if you plan on reading this book. And I definitely think you guys should read this book. If you have an interest in deep sea creatures and essays about queer and mixed race identity, amongst other things, then I definitely think you guys will enjoy this book. I give it a solid 4 stars. Next up, we have Old Enough by Haley Jacobson. Old Enough is Haley Jacobson's debut novel that came out about 2 months ago, and it was our July fiction book for Saf Lit. Old Enough follows Savannah, Sav, Henry, a bisexual college sophomore who's just trying to navigate life, you know, just trying to figure out who she is, what she wants in a friend group, what she wants in a relationship. However, Sav is completely thrown for a loop when Izzy, her childhood best friend, gets engaged, which is complicated because Sav and Izzy's friendship has never fully recovered from what happened between Sav and Izzy's older brother. We follow Sav as she attempts to juggle new friendships and relationships with ones that she's beginning to realize that she has outgrown, and as Izzy's wedding approaches, Sav is forced to confront trauma that she had thought she had put behind her. I enjoyed Old Enough way more than I thought I would. When I first started reading the book, I was kind of iffy about it because some of the dialogue and like the writing is a bit clunky and awkward, and I was like, I don't really know about this. Like, I'm reading it for the book club, but I was like, I don't really know if I actually like this that much. But after like the first 80 pages or so, like somewhere around that mark, I was like, you know what, like I feel like the writing like really improved, and I really found myself enjoying the book. Again, the writing starts off kind of wonky, and there are parts throughout the book, even past that like initial 80-page mark, where someone says something or something is described in a way that I was like, oh, it's a bit corny. I was like, ooh, a bit cringed a little bit. But I feel like if you can get past that first bit of the book, I think that you'll be okay and that you'll end up liking the book. That being said, a central theme of the plot involves sexual assault. Sav is a sexual assault survivor. Her abuser is Izzy's older brother, as I kind of alluded to when I was giving the summary of the book. And so while there are a lot of silly gay shenanigans and corny dialogue throughout the book, there's also an equal amount of scenes that are very heavy and very emotional that deal with Sav's journey as a survivor. For what it's worth, we don't witness Sav being assaulted. Like, it's obviously referenced a lot and a lot is implied, but there's not like a big like graphic sexual assault scene if that's what you're worried about. But I would say use your best discretion if you're thinking about reading this book and sexual assault is something that is triggering for you. Anyway, I give Old Enough a solid 4 out of 5 stars. I thought it handles the subject of sexual assault with a lot of care, and it shows a lot of tenderness to sexual assault survivors. Again, is the book a little corny and cringy at times? Yeah, the book is set on a college campus, and I didn't feel that the college kids were always depicted with the most accuracy as a college student myself, but I did really enjoy the scenes that took place in Sav's gender studies class. I thought that those were really good, especially the final scene that we get with the class. I thought that it was very sweet and heartfelt. So yeah, I recommend Old Enough. Again, use your best discretion in regards to the sexual assault stuff because, again, it is a central part of the book, but I really did enjoy this book. I thought it was a good read. And finally, we have Lesbian Love Story by Amelia Pasanza. Lesbian Love Story is Amelia Pasanza's debut book that came out in May of this year. It was also our July nonfiction book for Saf Lit. Lesbian Love Story is a memoir that chronicles the lives of 7 historical lesbians and how they relate back to Amelia's own life, as well as how each of these historical lesbians have shaped Amelia's definition of what it means to be a lesbian. Lesbian Love Story is meant to serve as Amelia's personal addition to the lesbian archives, as well as serve as an archive for the personal histories of these mostly 20th century lesbians who have had their histories either forgotten or destroyed. I really enjoyed Lesbian Love Story. I knew that I was gonna love it because it gave me like How Far the Light Reaches vibes, but instead of sea creatures, each chapter was about a different historical lesbian / queer person. I really loved learning about all these different historical lesbians because prior to reading this book, I had never heard of any of them, and that just goes to show how much we need books like this one. I don't have much else to say about Lesbian Love Story because I just think it's a really good book and I think you should go read it. I think it's best to just kind of like experience it for yourself. Like, I really, really loved it. If you enjoy learning about queer history, then I would definitely recommend this book. I really enjoyed the ways in which the archival texts were blended with Amelia's own input and interpretations. I give this book a solid 4.5 stars. Okay. So originally for this video, I was going to talk about 6 books instead of just 5. The last book that I was going to talk about was going to be Legendborn by Tracy Deonn, which I finished the first week of August. But once I actually read Legendborn, I realized that I'm going to need to make a whole separate video for me to talk about this book because holy shit, I think that I might have just read my new favorite book, maybe, possibly. I literally have so many thoughts and feelings about that book. It has consumed my every thought. I think about it all the time, and I cannot wait to make a video about it because I have so much to say. So stay tuned for that video in the coming months. If you want my quick review of Legendborn, I loved it. I gave it 5 stars. But if you want to hear specifically what I loved about that book, then I would watch my full review when that video comes out. Anyway, that's all I have for today's video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Like I just said, I am working on a Legendborn video, so stay tuned for that. It's gonna take me a while, but I promise it'll be worth the wait because I literally love that book so much and there is much to discuss. It's probably going to be a 2-part video, maybe even a 3-part video. Okay, I'm not so sure if it's gonna be a 3-part video, but definitely probably at least a 2-part video. I have a lot of things to say. Also, speaking of book videos, I'm still working on my Wrath in the Dawn duology video. Remember how I said I was making that video in back in March or April? I promise that I'm still working on it. It's still coming. The script's undergone a lot of rewrites. It's been a whole thing, but I finally have gotten it to a point that I'm happy with it. So I promise I'm still working on that video. It's still coming, so stay tuned for that. Also, let me know down below in the comments if you guys have any book recommendations based off the books that I have mentioned in today's video. My TBR is a million miles long, but that has not stopped me from adding new books to it all the time. So feel free to leave your recommendations down below. Once again, that's all I have for today's video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I upload Wednesdays, Fridays, and Saturdays, except when I don't. And I will see you guys in my next video. Bye, guys.